it just makes everybody just more and more fed up.
There's nothing new for them, and we're tired of it.
I fear for my sons when they go home, or when they go to the store and they go to school. I fear for them. I fear for myself.
Why do we have to prove our humanity to someone? We can think, we can talk, we can act the same as you. We put on our drawers the same as the next person, so I don't understand why we're not being seen as that. Why we have to fight so hard to be seen as that. It's not fair.
You know, those were just some of the powerful things we've heard this week from people of color here in Portland. And tonight, thousands of people continue to protest over the death of George Floyd. This is a live look at the protesters in Southeast Portland now, and you can see they're marching towards downtown. There are several planned demonstrations happening tonight as people come together all over the metro area and call for change. And you know, at KGW, we've pledged to listen, and to elevate voices from the African American community in our coverage. And we're going to focus on what needs to change and how we can get there. We're going to do that, a part of that here tonight at 7 o'clock. We're talking with leaders like Dr. Sean Nealand, the senior pastor at Highland Christian Center. He's also written 4 books. His latest one is called The Courage to Stand, A New America, which explores racial and religious stereotypes in our society. So, Dr. Nealand, first, let's start with just your thoughts just about everything that's happened, you know, across the country over the last week.
Yes, it has been a very traumatic experience to watch and to witness America go through such a series of events. I believe that the unrest, the racial, systematic system that we are accustomed to has to stop.
You know, an African-American doctor at OHSU has gotten a big following during the pandemic because of his dance moves on TikTok. But now he's using his platform to share his experience of what it's like to grow up Black in America. Brittany Falkers spoke with him.
You know him from his dance moves on TikTok. Dr. Jason Campbell, aka the TikTok Doc, brought us brevity while fighting a pandemic. Now he's bringing us his truth, written in an editorial as the country faces another crisis.
Growing up a Black man in America, why our souls are on fire.
What made you want to put that to paper and let the world know?
Yeah, I mean, now is such a tough time for the Black community, for Black men, for our allies that have long been unsupported. And it just felt like this is something that, you know, when I was young, didn't necessarily understand. And as I've grown and as society has changed, I've realized that now is the time to speak up. I was 7 years old. My mother yelled at me, "Stop, listen, stop. If you don't start listening to me, then you're going to get yourself killed one day, because the cops will only say stop once." Understand, we as Black men are not given the benefit of the doubt. When I leave my home, I do not walk around with a sign that reads Dr. Campbell, former student athlete at Emory University, graduate and former president of the Ohio State University College of Medicine, student body, MD, MS. I am just another Black man.
And something I think is so powerful that you have written is, when you go out into the world, there's not a nameplate for your experiences, for your successes and who you are. But at the same time, sitting back and reading that, I'm like, why should you need to have a nameplate that says who you are? Can you talk about what that's like to have to feel like you have to justify who you are?
Yeah, it's once again something that you maybe don't understand when you're growing up, and then it's when you have these different situations where, if I'm coming back from a sporting event or from some kind of event where I'm maybe looped or grouped as just another Black male, and whatever prejudice or stereotype one might give me, and so it makes you say, well, why? You know, it makes you think like, I don't deserve this, and my counterparts and colleagues don't have to go through this, nearly not to the same level. And so it's frustrating, and it's definitely can be paralyzing and a paralytic to some, if you will.
What advice do you have moving forward? How can we create and continue constructive conversations in our community?
Sure. It's individual moments. It's moments where you hear something, like they say at the airport, see something, say something, hear something, say something. If you know it's not right, if you no longer want to be associated with that person or a group that you feel like is not allowing progress forward when it comes to diversity and inclusion and to being anti-racist. And that's the new thing, really, Brittany. It's the idea that it's no longer okay just to be complacent and be silent and say, well, I didn't say that word or I did not participate in that activity, so I'm okay. It's like, I need to walk against that. I need to act against that. Irrelevant of profession or walk of life, we deserve an America that gives us, Black men, the benefit of the doubt, or at least an America that allows us to breathe.
This is about how do you heal a community that has consistently been damaged over and over and over again, right? And I think the media could do a much better job of not trying to make it so simple, right? Life is not black and white. There's a lot of gray and light.
That's Portland City Commissioner Joanne Hardesty talking about the coverage of the protests and riots we saw in the city this weekend. This morning, our Brenda Braxton spoke with her about those demonstrations and the hurt in the African American community.
Commissioner, we appreciate your time. Thank you so much for dialing in on Zoom. It has been an absolutely whirlwind of a weekend. Let me start off by saying, of course, you're new to City Hall, but you have been active in public advocacy for decades. I've been here 30 years. I think I've been covering you almost the entire time. Could talk to you for hours about what's going on. Yeah. But in the time that we have this morning, can I start with a couple broader questions to dive into?
Absolutely.
If somebody is watching this and they don't live in a big city and they're seeing these protests and the unfortunate violence, what's the human story about the death of George Floyd that everybody can understand, no matter where they live?
The human story is, should someone die under the hands of the state for committing allegedly a crime? We don't know yet. We won't know whether or not a crime had been committed. The important thing is, would you want your son, your daughter, your mother, your father to have the experience that African Americans continue to have all across this country?
So on Saturday, after the first night of violence here in Portland, you interrupted a press conference. You spoke up. You changed the conversation, saying that it was way too focused on police tactics. So we just played a few seconds of that. You were impassioned, you were frustrated, you were annoyed. I want to talk more about that. Explain why it's so important to pivot away from the marches and the violence.
Yes, because there was an image that continued to play on the news of two young Black men with one iPad apiece. And as the media continued to talk and talk and talk about the violence that had erupted, the image that the media displayed made it appear that Black people were the ones that were creating this violence. And so when the media, after the press conference, simply focused on police and police tactics and really fundamentally missed the message about the harm that's been done to African Americans since our arrival in this country, I got a little frustrated, because what I want people to understand is that these protests don't happen in isolation. Brenda, I've been protesting on the streets of Portland for 30 years. But what I saw Friday night, there was major protests of nonviolent people standing up for civil rights. But we have people that infiltrate these protests for the sole purpose of creating violent interactions and destruction. This is happening all over the country.
And welcome back. Let's continue our conversation with some perspectives from Black teachers in Portland. We've spent the entire school year inside Woodlawn Elementary School, telling stories about race in schools and gentrification. Let's listen now to what some of the Woodlawn teachers have to say about George Floyd and what's going on in our country right now. Woodlawn teachers Lionel Clegg in first grade.
I have two over here.
Anthony Lowry also in first grade.
All right, let's see what we got.
and Jai Blair in 4th grade.
And the first character that we're going to read about is Peter.
Have never shied away from talking to their students about racism. Finally, everyone else is talking about it too.
Last week has just been, or this whole week has just been very hard to deal with in general. Watching what our whole nation, not just the nation, the world is actually experiencing. I'm still even surprised that it took them as long as it did for even the first officer to be arrested. And I just really don't know what it's going to take. We see this year in, year out with different deaths, and police officers are exonerated. Enough is enough. I'm just tired.
Right. You said you kept thinking about...
Yeah. Comes to mind for me is Fannie Lou Hamer, civil rights activist, that said, I'm sick and tired of being sick and tired.
We are sick and tired of being sick and tired.
It was over 50 years ago, and I'm in that same place now, as well as many, not just African Americans, but just many people in general. Tired of this and tired of having to have the conversation. I really, growing up, would see my parents would look at things that happened during the times my parents were growing up, during the times of civil rights and even times before that. And as a child, as I was growing up, I just imagined I couldn't have lived during those times. I would have thought I would have been killed because I would be outspoken or something to that effect. And I look at those times, but there's nothing different from the civil rights movement to now. The only difference is we're actually having these things put on video.
So it just kind of stirs up, it's just one of those things, just stirs up a lot of memories where, I could have been that person, or my son could be that person, or, a neighbor or somebody really close to me, There's been a couple incidents, but one that really stands out happened right over here at Woodlawn Park, believe it or not. I was probably in my early 20s. Mid-20s, and a cop came over the hill and approached me when I was standing outside and asked me what I was drinking. And I told him I'm drinking, it was juice or Kool-Aid or something, and he thought I was being smart. And he slapped the cup out of my hand, put me in handcuffs, threw me in the back of the car. I had a friend with me I was talking to. He threw her in the back of the car, and he took me down to the station. And I was literally incarcerated for, 4 to 5 hours before they released me. He kicked me in the chest, and,
For nothing.
For nothing, yeah.
Jai Blair saw himself in Christian Cooper, the African-American birdwatcher in Central Park who asked Amy Cooper, a white woman, to put her dog on a leash.
That is traumatizing. When you're getting called those names and using the police as a force, and you know that, and you're using that to your advantage, that's the scary part, right? That's what makes us fearful of police and everything else, knowing that if that wasn't videotaped, if the cops did come and she said those things, who was going to be protected in that moment? And that's a question that we all need to ask ourselves.
And that really hit you?
Yeah. Because that's kind of every single day of my life is the lens that somebody sees me as is negative first, and that will harm them first. Even though if you ask a lot of people, I'm a pretty nice guy.
Something I talk about with my students is the idea of covert versus overt racism. But I look at a lot of the things that I feel as a person of color going into a store and being looked at and being followed. The way that, again, sometimes women may clutch their purse or go across the street instead of walking on the same side of the sidewalk as me.
You know what? You have to, as a black man, you have to kind of live with kind of you got to live with some toughness. You can't let every little thing bother you, so you kind of live kind of numb to some things just because, because they occur so often.
So I feel a lot more of the discrimination that I've had against me has been more covert compared to overt, but I've definitely experienced my run of the name calling and other things as well.
Lionel Clegg talks to his students about all of this, race, Black Lives Matter, and what's happening in the world.
It's my job. Again, like I just said, I'm building up the next generation I'm building up the next people that are going to be our leaders. So if I'm not instilling in them some difference, then I'm really losing an opportunity to help change the future.
You know, you talk a lot about these issues, and you never shy away from it. But do you get sick and tired of having to teach white people about this?
I consider myself an agent of change. And so although I'm tired at times, I feel it's my obligation if no one else is going to do it. I talked to you on the side about the idea of someone that's not racist versus someone that's an anti-racist. In this day and age, someone that's not racist isn't going to cut it. That's not going to be the status quo anymore. You either have to choose a side because you're being complacent and not doing something. Even though you may not agree with the tenets of racism, you still have an obligation when you see things happening to step up and say something. And that goes for all people. And so I'm at the point that, again, we can't stand by idly without saying something. It's all of our obligation at this point to step up and say things that are injustices across the board.